Welcome to Food Safety Training for all programs and partners of Second Harvest Food Bank of North Central Ohio. During today's video, please be sure to take notes throughout the training so that you can write down any specific questions you might have about food safety. This training is the Food Handler Food Safety Training required for all programs with Second Harvest. If you do operate a hot meal program like a shelter, a kids cafe, or a hot meal, you'll also need to complete the food preparation training. In order to fully complete the food handler training for today, be sure to complete the quiz found in the YouTube video notes below. Once you successfully complete the quiz, we'll send you your certificate of completion. For the food handling course, we'll review food safety basics, why food safety is important, good personal hygiene, receiving and storing food safely, evaluating, repacking, and transporting food safely, cleaning and sanitizing, and we'll review some frequently asked questions. To start off, here are some basic food safety items that we look at when we do our monitor visits. Making sure that food is stored 4 inches off the floor, 4 inches away from the wall, 18 inches away from the ceiling, and making sure that chemicals and soaps are stored either under food items or away from food items so there's no opportunity for chemicals or soaps to spill onto food. In addition, please make sure you're taking weekly temperature logs for any freezers, coolers, and dry storage areas. For inventory rotation, we need you to date your cases. Please be sure you include the month and the year in your date. That month and year date can be the date that you received the product, or it can be the month and the year that the product expires. We really just want to make sure that you're consistent with how you date your cases so that your inventory doesn't sit and that you know you're using what came in first before you go to newer product. Why food safety is important. Here we'll talk about how food becomes unsafe, your role in keeping food safe, understanding food allergies, and preventing food allergen contamination. It's important to note that there are 3 hazards from the environment: biological, physical, and chemical. Biological hazards are usually what we talk about when we're looking at bacteria, viruses, any sort of germs. A physical contaminant can be anything that really shouldn't be in the food that happens to get into the food. So you see an exaggerated picture of an earring in the lettuce here, but that really could be something as small as a very small earring. It could be jewelry, it could be plastic wrap from food packages that shouldn't end up in food. And we have chemical hazards, which is anything from soaps, sanitizer that hasn't dried yet, or any sort of cleaning supplies. How do people make food unsafe? Their number one cause for foodborne illness is poor personal hygiene. That's when we transfer pathogens from our bodies to food. Food also becomes unsafe through cross-contamination. That's where we transfer pathogens from one food or surface to another food item. In this case here, it looks like some meat juices have dripped onto the lettuce, which we definitely don't want to have happen. Time temperature abuse is another way food becomes unsafe. That's when we let food stay out for too long at temperatures that are really good for pathogen growth. Please make sure that if you have any freezer or cooler items, those items are stored appropriately. Lastly, poor cleaning and sanitizing can make food unsafe. Of course, that means we transfer pathogens or germs from unclean surfaces onto food. In this case, we're looking at a scale that looks like it hasn't been cleaned before those Cheerios are about to be weighed. For a quick recap of what we just covered, what's the problem here? Leaving raw chicken breasts on a pallet in a loading area that's not refrigerated. Is that time temperature abuse, poor personal hygiene, cross-contamination, or poor cleaning and sanitizing? If you chose A, time temperature abuse, you're absolutely right. That raw chicken breast left on a pallet in the loading area really should have been put in the refrigerator immediately. And what about this one? What's the problem with sneezing on food? Again, the options are time temperature abuse, poor personal hygiene, cross-contamination, or poor cleaning and sanitizing. In this case, it's pretty easy to see that poor personal hygiene is the issue here. Anytime that you need to cough or sneeze, you really want to do it away from food, or at a minimum, cough or sneeze into your inner arm. With the same options that we've had before, what's wrong with keeping produce that raw meat juices have leaked on? In this case, it's cross-contamination, just like we saw before. We want to make sure that we're avoiding any sort of cross-contamination, especially if it has to do with raw meat juices leaking on to ready-to-eat foods. Lastly, what's wrong with scraping off food from an otherwise clean food storage container? It's pretty easy to see. In this case, it's poor cleaning and sanitizing. Anytime you're going to store food in a container, that container needs to be cleaned and sanitized, not just scraped off. So what's your role in keeping food safe? We want to practice good personal hygiene so that we don't transfer pathogens from our bodies to food. Take a quick moment to look at the picture here. How is good personal hygiene being practiced in this photo? As you can see, this person is wearing a hairnet. He's also wearing a beard net. He has single-use gloves on, what looks like to be clean clothing, and a clean apron. It's very important that your staff and volunteers have clean clothing and good personal hygiene habits when they're helping out at your program. Like we talked about before, we want to make sure that we are controlling the time and temperature of food. This is very important so that we make sure that we don't let food stay out too long in temperatures that are good for growing pathogens. In this picture, how do you think temperature is being controlled? Of course, the temperature is being checked, and that ensures that the food is held at the correct temperature. Again, if you have any sort of food items that belong in the refrigerator or the freezer, please make sure that those items go into the appropriate storage area as soon as possible. Once again, we want to make sure that we are preventing cross-contamination. That means we don't transfer pathogens from one food to another, and we don't transfer pathogens from one surface to another. Here, with the strawberries and ground beef, how is cross-contamination being prevented? The strawberries are being stored above the ground beef. That means there's no opportunity for the ground beef to leak onto the strawberries. For cleaning and sanitizing, we want to make sure that everything is kept clean and that you clean and sanitize anything that touches food. In this case here, what we can see is that this person is practicing good cleaning and sanitizing by cleaning and sanitizing in a 3-compartment sink. When it comes to food allergens, we know that allergies can be very dangerous. What are the most common food allergens that you need to look out for? There are top 8 food allergens. For here you can see milk and dairy, eggs, soy, fish, and here we have tree nuts, peanuts, shellfish, and wheat. We want to make sure that we're preventing food allergen contamination. That's called cross-contact. Cross-contact is a type of cross-contamination specific to food allergens. That means we want to store food with allergens separately from allergen-free products. We don't want to store food containing allergens above allergen-free food. And it's a good idea, if possible, to use a dedicated pallet or bins for products that are allergens. A little pop quiz. Which of these items is a common food allergen? We have tea and cod. If you chose cod, you'd be right. Tea is not a common allergen. Which one here? We have wheat flour and melons. As we said before, wheat is definitely a food allergen. Melons, not so much. In this case, we have peanut butter and crab legs. Of course, both of these items are a common food allergen. How about potatoes and mushrooms? If you thought mushrooms, unfortunately you're mistaken. A lot of people think mushrooms can be a common allergen, but actually, it's really just that some people don't like mushrooms. In this case, potatoes and mushrooms, neither one of them is a common food allergen. When we look at tomatoes in pecan pie, of course the pecan pie, being a tree nut, is the common food allergen. How about citrus and bell peppers? In this case, once again, neither one of them is a food allergen. And then we have squash and eggplant. Being healthy vegetables, this is also not a common food allergen. Soybeans or rice and rice products. If you chose soybeans, you'd be right. How about eggs and ice cream? In this case, both eggs and ice cream are considered common food allergens. Preventing cross-contact from spilled food. Of course, accidents do happen. If you do happen to drop or spill a food allergen, make sure you immediately clean it up. You also want to make sure that you inspect carefully if that product has touched any other non-allergens. After inspecting the spill area, please be sure to dispose of any products in contact with the spilled item. The food might not need to be discarded if the packaging can be safely cleaned and sanitized. And lastly, you want to make sure you clean and sanitize the entire area. On to good personal hygiene. Here we're going to learn about how and when to wash your hands, where to wash your hands, other hand care guidelines, what to wear, and some other important practices. How and when to wash your hands. It's important to know that hands can transfer pathogens to food. Of course, that's why we always wash our hands frequently throughout the day. And hand washing is a critical step for avoiding food contamination. Once again, poor personal hygiene, including washing your hands, is the #1 cause of foodborne illness. How to wash your hands. Now this might seem like common sense, but it is important to understand each step of washing your hands. Hand washing should take about 20 seconds. For the first step, we want to make sure we're using running water as hot as you can comfortably stand. The second step is to apply soap, and make sure that it's enough soap to have a good lather. Please don't have bar soap in your kitchen or your restrooms. We want to make sure we have liquid soap. The third step is to scrub your hands and arms vigorously. You really should be scrubbing for 10 to 15 seconds, making sure you clean under your fingernails, between your fingers, on the top of your hands, and even a little bit up your wrist. Step 4 is rinsing your hands and arms thoroughly. Of course, we want to make sure that we're using that same running water as hot as you can stand. For drying your hands, please make sure you don't use an apron or any other part of your clothing. We want to be using a single-use paper towel or a hand dryer if you have one available at your location. If you do have paper towels, it's always a best practice to turn off the faucet with the paper towel and use that paper towel to open up the restroom door. In this case, is hand washing required? It looks like this gentleman just used the restroom. Of course, the answer is yes. You always want to make sure you wash your hands after using the restroom. How about in this situation? This person is touching her forehead with her hand. If you said yes, you're absolutely right. Anytime you touch your face, hair, body, or your clothes, you want to make sure you wash your hands. In this case, she would actually need to take her gloves off, wash her hands, and put gloves back on. How about this situation? Looks like this person is handling raw meat package. Of course, yes. We want to wash our hands after handling any raw meat, poultry, or seafood before and after we handle those items, even if those items are in a package. Here it looks like this person is touching her shoulder. Should she wash her hands? Yes, of course. Again, we want to wash hands after touching our clothes or apron. How about taking out the garbage? I hope you said yes on this one. Of course, anytime you handle garbage, you want to make sure you wash your hands immediately afterwards, regardless of whether or not you're dealing with food afterwards. Looks like this person is just about to sneeze. I would really hope she's going to wash her hands after sneezing. If you sneeze, cough, or even blow your nose, you want to make sure you're washing your hands afterwards, especially before handling food. How about using chemicals? Remember, like we said, a chemical can be a hazard. That means if you use chemicals or soaps or sanitizers, you want to make sure you wash your hands after using those items for cleaning purposes. This person is smoking a cigarette. Should he wash his hands? Most definitely. Especially with smoking, it means your hands are touching your face, which can have more germs than what's on your hands. Of course, after smoking a cigarette, we want to make sure that that person is washing their hands before handling food. How about chewing gum? The answer here is yes. You want to wash your hands after chewing gum or tobacco. Now, it's also important to know that you shouldn't be doing these things while around food anyway. I don't know many people who take a break to go chew a stick of gum, but it could happen. You might have somebody who takes a smoke break or steps outside to chew tobacco. In any of those cases, once again, we want to make sure they're washing their hands. This person looks very happy to be eating an apple, but should she wash her hands after eating the apple? Yes, of course. Definitely want to make sure we're washing our hands after eating or drinking anything before handling food items. What about before we put gloves on? Once again, we do need to wash hands before putting gloves on or starting a new task. How about if you're mopping the floor? We do want to make sure we're washing hands after touching anything that might contaminate your hands. In this case, mopping the floor could be a dirty task, and you're handling chemicals. How about this picture? This person is walking away from the food area and should probably return to keep helping out. Should she wash her hands? This is a bit of a tricky one, but the answer is yes. If you leave the food prep area or food handling area, you want to make sure that you wash your hands once you return. Some important things about hand sanitizers or antiseptics. You never want to use a hand sanitizer instead of washing your hands. You can use it after washing your hands, but you don't want it to be a replacement. You also want to make sure you wait for the hand sanitizer to dry before touching your food or the equipment or putting gloves on. If the sanitizer isn't quite dry yet, that actually becomes a chemical hazard. And of course, if you're not sure how to use the sanitizer, follow the manufacturer's directions. Where do you want to wash your hands? Does this look okay? Looks like this person is washing their hands in a 3-compartment sink. No, we don't want to wash hands in a 3-compartment sink. We do want to make sure that you have a designated hand-washing sink at your location. That sink should be designated for washing hands only and no other task. What about this situation? Does it look okay? Some dirty water is being dumped down the hand-washing sink. No, we definitely don't want to be dumping dirty water down a hand-washing sink. Again, the hand-washing sink should only be for hand washing and no other tasks. Once again, we don't want to use a hand-washing sink for dumping dirty water, or for food prepping, or for washing tools and equipment. Should only be for hand washing only. Is this a safe practice? We've got a bunch of boxes in front of the hand-washing sink. In this case, we don't want to see this happen. The hand-washing sink should be open and free to get to, especially when your hands are dirty, which is why you're walking over to the hand-washing sink. In this case, someone would have to use their dirty hands to move those boxes. Your hand-washing sink should be stocked appropriately. You should have hot and cold running water, liquid soap, again we don't want to use bar soap for hand washing, single-use paper towels or a hand dryer, and a garbage container to throw away your paper towel. If these items aren't stocked at the hand washing sink that you use at your program, be sure to tell someone who can arrange to get these items in stock. What's wrong with this picture? It looks like he's not putting his gloves on correctly. We don't want to be blowing into our gloves because it would put pathogens from our breath inside the glove. Your program might want to use gloves for one reason or another. When handling food, you want to make sure you're using single-use gloves. That means you shouldn't use gloves that you're going to wear repeatedly. And making sure that when you do have single-use gloves, you only wear them once until they're dirty or get broken, and then they go in the garbage. For those gloves, make sure they fit your hand. You don't want it to be too tight or too loose. Being too tight might make them rip pretty easily. Being too loose could be a personal safety hazard. You don't want to blow into them, like we just mentioned, and don't roll them to make them easier to put on. Once you touch the outside of that glove, the glove is now contaminated. How about this picture? What's wrong with it? The gloves are being washed and reused. Again, single-use gloves are single-use. We don't want to wash our gloves. If they become dirty, you simply throw them away, wash your hands, and put new gloves on. To use gloves appropriately, we want to make sure you're washing your hands before putting the gloves on. While you're using your gloves, please be sure you're changing your gloves as soon as they tear or if they become dirty. In addition, we want to change our gloves from one task to the next. That way we can prevent cross-contamination. Also, we want to change gloves before or after handling any food item that's a known food allergen. We should also change our gloves after handling raw meat, seafood, or poultry, and before handling ready-to-eat foods. To get you thinking a little bit, you should also change your gloves after an interruption, such as taking a phone call. Now, our phones are very, very dirty. In general, I would recommend that you ask your other staff or volunteers to put their phone away in a locker or in their cars, if possible, while they're helping out your food program. At a minimum, have them keep their phone in their pocket and only touch it in emergency, or if they do touch their phone, to wash their hands or change their gloves immediately. In addition, think about if you leave the kitchen or if you leave the storage area, think about the tasks that you're doing away from that area during that interruption. That's why we definitely want to make sure that if you have gloves on, you take your gloves off, wash your hands, and put new gloves on. Are these hands safe for food handling? The answer is yes. The fingernails are short and clean. The hands look clean. It looks like they're pretty ready to go for handling food items. What about these hands for handling exposed food? This is a bit of a different case. This person's hand has fingernails with polish on it, and the polish isn't covered. For your hands and nails, you want to make sure if you're handling any sort of exposed food, if you have polish, to be wearing a glove. Also, you want to wear a glove if you have false fingernails, just so that your false fingernail doesn't fall into the food, just like nail polish might. How about these hands with a Band-Aid? This person is about halfway there to being able to handle exposed food. If you happen to have a small cut on your hand, the safest thing to do is to bandage the wound and wear a glove, even if you're not touching any sort of ready-to-eat foods or raw foods. If you have a wound in a different place, like your arm or the rest of your body, just make sure that that wound is completely taken care of and covered up before handling any sort of food. Let's talk about what to wear. Is this a safe practice for handling food? It looks like he's almost there, but not quite. This food handler is not wearing a hat or any other hair covering. When we look at covering hair, we want to make sure that we have a clean hat or other hair covering when we're working with ready-to-eat foods. That includes any sort of utensils or equipment used for meal prep. Anybody with a beard or a mustache should also wear a beard restraint. When it comes to clothing and aprons, we want to make sure that we have clean clothes whenever we're working around food, including pantry storage areas. Throw away any sort of disposable aprons when you're done with them, or wash them immediately as soon as you're done with your meal or your activity that required an apron. If you have any sort of personal belongings while you're helping out at your food program, please be sure you keep them separate from the food area. When it comes to jewelry, please make sure you remove any jewelry. You want to make sure that you don't have any sort of jewelry on before handling your exposed food, or when you're working around any sort of food handling areas. We don't want you to wear any sort of rings, with the exception of a plain band. We don't want you to have any bracelets, and you shouldn't wear a watch. Now going back to bracelets, ServSafe specifically says you shouldn't have any medical bracelets, but I would not recommend any of your staff and volunteers to remove a medical bracelet while they're helping out with your program. Let's look at a little quiz. Looking at these options, which practices are unsafe? Wearing a dirty shirt, wearing nail polish without wearing gloves, wearing a baseball cap while packaging food, and wearing a watch. If you chose A, B, and D, you're correct. The only thing that's a safe practice here is wearing a baseball cap while packaging food. What about in this case? We have removing a disposable apron and putting it back on after returning to the clean room, wearing a bandage on your finger under your gloves, cleaning and sanitizing food scoops without wearing a hat or other hair covering, and wearing the same pants several days in a row until they get dirty. The unsafe practices here are A, C, and D. The only safe thing to do in this case is wear a bandage on your finger under your gloves. Let's talk about some other important practices. For example, what's wrong with this picture? Of course, the food handler is drinking in a food handling area. Again, we want to make sure we're not eating or drinking around food. In addition to eating and drinking, we also don't want to be smoking, chewing gum, or chewing tobacco in the food handling areas or in the food storage areas. Please be sure you're only doing these activities in a designated area. Your food program might have a specific volunteer hangout lounge, or just ask you to do these things outside. What to do if you're sick? You want to make sure that you tell your lead coordinator for your food program that you're not feeling well, especially if you've been diagnosed with a foodborne illness. The symptoms to really look out for are vomiting, diarrhea, jaundice, which is yellowing of the skin and eyes, and a sore throat with a fever. Those are all symptoms indicative of a foodborne illness which we don't want around our food. Next, we're going to talk about receiving and storing food safely. Now is a great time to take a break if you need a little bit of a stretcher. Just pause the video and come back when you're ready. Receiving and storing food safely. For this topic, we're going to learn controlling time and temperature during receiving, inspecting food during receiving to make sure it's safe, and storing food safely. What's important about this temperature range? We're looking at 41 degrees up to 135 degrees. This temperature range is important because it's called the temperature danger zone. That means that pathogens or germs on food can grow extremely quickly within this temperature range. That's why it's important that temperatures are controlled at all times, from the time that you either pick up or get your order delivered to your location, all the way down to hand off to the community member receiving food. Now, some thermometers that might be helpful to you: the infrared thermometer, the thermocouple, or a different type of digital thermometer, and the bimetallic stem thermometer. An infrared thermometer displays temperatures immediately. It prevents cross-contamination because it doesn't need to touch anything, and it only measures the surface temperatures of food and equipment. This type of thermometer is ideal for receiving or just a quick check to make sure that your temperatures are where they should be. The thermocouple, or a different type of digital thermometer, is useful when we're looking at food preparation. This is a good thermometer for thinner meats such as a thin chicken breast or a hamburger patty because it doesn't take much to take the temperature. It also records the temperature pretty quickly. The bimetallic stem thermometer is most useful for a large piece of meat like a whole turkey or a roast. This one does take a little bit longer to record the temperature for at least 15 seconds to make sure that you have the right recording. When we look at receiving food, most of your food is going to come from second harvest. But you do want to make sure that you are looking at our vehicles every so often just to make sure that our vehicles are safe for food delivery. If you do find any issues with our vehicles or the food that you receive, please contact our operations department immediately so that we can take care of the issue. What you're looking for is any sort of signs of pests in the product or in the vehicle, and just general cleanliness. You should also look at the condition of the product with the caveat that all of our orders are received as is. If you do have any issues with the condition of your product, like if it's damaged, please contact customer service within 24 hours of your pickup or your delivery. You also want to make sure that you're looking for any sort of items that you shouldn't be receiving. This is mostly when you receive donations directly to your location. You don't want to accept any sort of homemade product or if it doesn't have a label. Looking at the temperature of food when you receive it, you should just double check to make sure that refrigerated foods are 41 degrees or lower. Frozen food, at a minimum, should be frozen solid, if not recording as 0 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. For cut produce, that should be in the refrigerator at 41 degrees or lower. But for whole produce, dry storage temperatures of 50 to 70 degrees is acceptable, although we do recommend that you keep your whole produce in a refrigerator when possible. Take a minute to identify each item that was not received at the correct temperature. Frozen meat received at 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Bags of cut lettuce received at 50 degrees. Bags of cut melons received at 45 degrees. And milk received at 50 degrees. I hope you chose all four. All of these items were received hotter than they should have been. The frozen meat should have been frozen solid or at 0 degrees, and the rest of the items are refrigerated items, which should have been received at 41 degrees or lower. How about this? We have some cultured sour cream sitting at a good 45 degrees. Is that being stored correctly? Of course not. Anything that requires refrigeration should be at 41 degrees or below. For general storage guidelines, once again, refrigerated items should be at 41 degrees or lower, and this includes cut produce. For items stored in a freezer, make sure that the food is frozen solid, or the recommended temperature is 0 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. For shelf-stable items in dry storage areas, make sure that your dry storage areas are designated for food items only. The temperature requirement is between 50 and 70 degrees on your weekly temp log. As mentioned in the food safety basics, some other things to keep in mind with your food storage is to make sure that the food is at least 4 inches off the floor, 4 inches away from the wall, and 18 inches away from the ceiling. This includes any sort of walk-in cooler or walk-in freezer that you might have. The next thing we're going to look at is different dates that you'll see on products. Please understand that most of these dates are purely a quality date and have nothing to do with food safety. I know that's probably shocking to a lot of you, but it's true. The dates on products are really just for retailers. For instance, the sell-by date tells the store how long to display the product for sale. It's just a quality date, and the product is still safe to eat past this date. Also keep in mind that any shelf-stable items coming from Second Harvest Food Bank are typically good for 1 year past that sell-by, expiration, best by, etc. date. Our general rule of thumb is 1 year past that date, where we say it's still safe for human consumption. Here you can see the packing or manufacturing date. This is used by manufacturers for tracking and recalls, but it's not a quality or expiration date. If you find an item like this in your inventory, and it doesn't have an expiration date or a quality date, please discard that item. Next, we have the use by or expiration date, which is interchangeable language. The use by or expiration date simply means that it's the last date recommended for the product while at peak quality. Again, the product is still safe to eat past this date, and it's just a quality date. The last date we'll look at is the best by or best if used by date. This is the date by which the product should be eaten for best flavor or quality. Again, this is a quality date or recommendation, not based on food safety. Feeding America notifies food banks every day about recalls that have happened in our network. If any of these recalls directly impact Second Harvest or your food program directly, we would be in contact with you immediately. If you're contacted by us, please be sure that you have the product in inventory, and if you do, make sure it's off to the side and labeled as a recalled item so that it's not distributed or handed out to anybody. The recalls that we have are issued through the FDA and the USDA, so you know it's reliable information. The last topic we'll cover about storing your food safely is inventory rotation. Please understand that when you receive food items from Second Harvest or donations, you'll have to date your cased items. That means anything that comes in a cardboard box or the cases of canned goods need to be dated as well. Those dates need to include the month and the year of whichever system you choose here. Please just be sure that you're being consistent in how you date your items. The first option is first expired, first out. We're going to use the expiration date. Let's say something expires in January of 2022. You'll date your case with a 1/22. That indicates January of 22. You'll want to store that food that expires first in the front and use that food first because it's the oldest. The second option is using FIFO, or first in, first out. That means you'll date your cases with the day that you received your items. Let's say you received them in September of 2020. You'll date your case with 9/20. That indicates September of the year 2020. Again, you'll store the older food in front of the newer food. That way, you don't have inventory sitting for a very long time on your shelves. Next, we'll talk about evaluating, repacking, and transporting food safely. In this section, we'll talk about evaluating the condition of food, repackaging food, and loading and distributing food safely. If you're looking at these two cans, which can would you think needs to be discarded? The answer is both of them. This can here has a severe dent in the seam, which we really want to avoid. A dent in the seam can mean that the seal has been broken, and we don't want to have any opportunity for pathogens getting into the canned item. In the other can that you saw, there's a deep dent in the can body, and it means that the can isn't stackable. If you run into these two issues, it means that, again, the seal could be broken and we don't want to introduce pathogens to the can. And the other concern with a deep dent like this is that the metal has actually opened up inside the can and it's contaminating the food inside. Now let's take a look at this one. We have a can of mystery product and a can of corn. We definitely don't want to serve the mystery product. For this instance, any sort of missing labels or unreadable labels due to stains or tears, or not having a code date is all a reason to toss that product and not distribute it to any community member. And then what about these two cans? One looks a little swollen and one looks pretty rusted. Both of these cans should really be thrown away. When we look at this can, we have swollen and bulging ends. We want to avoid that because that's a sign that the can has been susceptible to botulism. In the other instance, rust that can't be wiped off is an indication that something has gone wrong with the product and the metal might be contaminating inside where the food is. How about this can? It looks pretty normal, but it does have a hole in it. Of course, if you find any products that have a hole, or there's any signs of leaking, you want to make sure you throw that product out, and definitely don't want to distribute it to any community members. Similarly, we do want to look at other food items as well, outside of cans, for any sort of defects or reasons we should discard the item. In this case, the can of jelly looks like it has a dented lid. Any jars or bottles with a dented lid, a swollen lid, or rusted lid should also be thrown away. Here we have a milk jug that looks like the seal has been broken. In any cases where the lid is loose, the seal is broken, or something looks like it's been tampered with, we want to throw those items away. Also be mindful of any jars that have a button lid. If you can press that button and it makes a sound, that means the seal is broken, and you don't want to hand that out either. It looks like here we have a homemade jar of peppers. It is missing a label. So we also don't want to distribute this item. Any food item that's missing a label, or you can't read the label, or it doesn't have any code dates, we want to make sure we're getting rid of. And on that note, anything that's been homemade, we can't accept as a donation with our food pantry or any other food programs. We don't know how that food has been prepared, so we want to make sure that we are keeping our community members safe with items that have been labeled with the ingredients and the code dates. Now this jar here looks a bit messy. Any signs of leakage, or if the jar looks chipped or broken, we definitely want to throw those items away. With this jar of jelly, you can clearly see mold, which means the food is not going to be good to eat. Be mindful of these things and check out your donations carefully to make sure that you don't distribute any sort of moldy or bad products. Dry goods packaged in paper or plastic are a bit of a special case. Some dry food is packaged in a single package, such as a bag of flour. Now, if that bag ends up breaking, unfortunately, we do have to throw away the whole bag. It's not as simple as taping up the bag and still serving it. Because we don't know what could have gotten into that bag while it was open, we would rather be safe than sorry. However, in other cases, such as cereal, some pastas or breads or rice, some packaging comes in a double layer. If you think about a box of cereal, the outside of it is cardboard, the inside of it is plastic. So when we receive donations at Second Harvest, sometimes what we'll do, if the packaging on the outside looks like it's been damaged, we'll open up that cardboard package and make sure that the inner package is still sealed. If we determine that that inner package is still safe, we will tape back up the box and it goes on to our shopping list. Just be mindful that because something might not look the best in the package, doesn't necessarily mean it's unsafe to eat. Here we can see a box that looks like it's been a bit nibbled on. Be sure you're always checking your inventory and your storage areas in general for any signs of pests. You want to look for any sort of gnaw marks like you see here, droppings, any insects, dead or alive, or pin-sized holes in packaging, which is an indication of little moths that can get into your food. When we consider the quality of produce, sometimes we do run into mold. In that case, just make a decision on how you want to handle that product. If you run into anything that has a lot of mold, decay or rot, or any bad odors, it's probably best to throw that item away. However, if you do run into a package of strawberries like you see here, you might be willing to pick out the moldy strawberries and still serve the rest of the package just so that you're not wasting as much product. The same goes for any produce that's severely bruised. We don't want to serve the items that are severely bruised, but you can glean those products to make sure that what does go out is still safe to eat without wasting a lot of product. For fruits like this, you want to look out for the severe bruising, skin that's not intact, and that's because bruises are a way for germs to get into the produce, and the produce will just rot much quicker. When you're considering the condition of food, you also need to think about what temperature it should be stored at. Looking here, we have lettuce sitting at 45 degrees. This produce is too warm because it's cut lettuce, which should be refrigerated at 41 degrees or lower. And you can't really tell, but this one also doesn't have any code dates. With warm lettuce and no dates, this is something we should throw away. Here we have some potatoes in a garbage bag. Doesn't really sound that appetizing. In this case, we have items that are packaged in an unsafe packaging. Whenever you package your food items, please make sure that the packaging is designed for food. We don't want to keep any sort of food in garbage bags or other unsafe storage areas. Occasionally, we do receive donations, and you might as well directly at your program, of over-the-counter medications, or OTCs. When you run into these items, just make sure that there's no broken tamper-resistant seal and that the package isn't damaged. You also want to make sure that these products are not expired before they go out. Over-the-counter medications are different than food, where we really do need to stick to that expiration date. Look for these problems when you receive any OTCs. If the label is not intact or readable, or if the label doesn't include any of the necessary information for over-the-counter medication. It should include the common name of the drug, a list of ingredients, the quantity of contents, instructions for correct use, the recommended dose, and any storage requirements if there are any. Repacking food items. This is a common question that we get at Second Harvest. For example, you might get a large bin of cereal that you want to repack into smaller portions to distribute to more families. As a general rule of thumb, we don't want you to do this. There are a lot of food safety concerns that come in when you start touching prepared food and you're not trained to do so. If you see something on our shopping list that you would like to order but it's in a bulk item, you can give us a call and see if we would be able to repack it on our end in our facility. We do have a clean room at Second Harvest where we're able to repack bulk items into smaller portions. That way it's easier for our pantry programs to distribute to families. If you've placed your order and you're ready to pick up from Second Harvest, please be sure that your vehicle is clean, it's pest-free, and that the vehicle is not used to haul garbage at any time. Additionally, please don't bring your pets when you're picking up food or have them around when we deliver to your food program. Another key thing to keep in mind is that if you bring your regular commuter vehicle to come pick up food from us, and you have any sort of oil or antifreeze or wiper fluid in your vehicle, let's say you keep that in your trunk like I do, just make sure that you don't keep food or transport food in your trunk where those chemicals are stored. And we want to make sure that your vehicle is locked if you're going to step away from it for any reason, but also we want to make sure that you're transporting the food directly from Second Harvest to your food program with minimal stops in between. Here's something that we don't want to see if we deliver directly to your program. Your order being left outside. Once we deliver the product, which we'll make sure somebody is available at your program before we drop the product, please be sure that that product is taken inside and put away immediately. Another problem that you might see here is food left by the garbage. This is just asking for pests to come check out your food order. Always make sure that food is stored away from garbage, and again, you want to put it away immediately. While you're loading your vehicle, you want to keep in mind the same food storage requirements that you would have back at your facility. In this case, there's a bit of a problem with keeping the raw meat over the ready-to-eat watermelons. As you're transporting food, you want to be able to make sure that your raw meats are under your ready-to-eat foods. Additionally, also try to keep your allergens separated during transportation. When picking up your order from Second Harvest, we do understand that many of you probably don't have a refrigerated vehicle. In that case, we do require a thermal blanket to cover up any sort of frozen or refrigerated items. If your order is very, very small, you would be able to keep it in a cooler with some ice packs just to keep it cold during transportation. In the best case scenario, we would prefer that your transportation doesn't take any more than 30 minutes if you don't have a refrigerated vehicle to transport your product. We understand that this also may not be possible for some of our programs, especially those of you who live a little bit far away. In that case, just do your best to come pick up your order and head straight back to your program to unload. The last section we'll cover is cleaning and sanitizing. In this section, we'll review how and when to clean and sanitize, how to manually clean and sanitize tools and utensils, handling garbage, and spotting pests. There is actually a difference between cleaning and sanitizing. On one hand, cleaning removes food and other dirt from a surface, while sanitizing reduces pathogens on a surface to a safe level. In each of these pictures, can you determine what needs to be cleaned or cleaned and sanitized? When we're mopping the floor, we just need to clean it because food, hopefully, should not be on the floor. In the second picture where we're weighing something, any of those utensils or equipment should be cleaned and sanitized in the case that food does touch those surfaces. If you're wondering whether something needs to be cleaned or cleaned and sanitized, just ask yourself the question, is food going to touch this surface? Here we can see that walls and floors, storage shelves, and garbage containers don't need to be sanitized, they just need to be cleaned and rinsed, because typically food is not going to be touching those surfaces. What does need to be cleaned and sanitized, again, is any surface that food is going to touch as part of your food preparation process. That means any plastic food bins, ladles, scales, prep tables in a clean room, sorting tables, or scoops. The formal process to clean and sanitize a surface starts with scraping or removing food from the surface. This could be a table as you see here, or a dish. Second, you want to wash the surface with soap and water. Third, you want to rinse the surface with just water. The fourth step is to actually sanitize the surface. The last step in cleaning and sanitizing is to let the surface or the dish to air dry. It's important to not use any sort of paper towel or cloth towel to dry your surface because that could introduce lint, which would be considered a physical contaminant. For those of you who may have large equipment to clean and sanitize, please be sure that you unplug the equipment first. Then you want to make sure you remove all of the removable parts, wash, rinse, and sanitize those parts by hand. And then you want to clean the actual equipment. So you'll scrape or remove any food from the equipment surfaces, wash, rinse, and sanitize the equipment itself. And again, let everything air dry rather than using a paper or cloth towel. Lastly, of course you'll put the equipment back together so it's ready to use next time. Now that we've covered how to clean and sanitize, let's talk about when it should be done. Ideally, you want to make sure you're cleaning your surfaces and your utensils before and after use. I know it sounds like a lot of work to do that before you prepare a meal in a kitchen, but it is important, especially if you share a kitchen with other organizations or groups of people, just to make sure the utensils and equipment that you're using is definitely clean and sanitized. There are also requirements of when to clean and sanitizing after a certain period of time. After 4 hours of using a dish or a utensil, that's when you should wash and sanitize that dish or utensil. And of course, if anything becomes contaminated, if you drop something, it should be cleaned and sanitized immediately. Now, many of our programs probably aren't going to run into this situation because most of your programs run maybe an hour or two, and not necessarily 4 hours. When we talk about cleaning and sanitizing, a common question is what type of sanitizer to use. Really, the important thing is to make sure that your sanitizer is food safe. To make sure it's actually effective, really the answer is to make sure you're following the manufacturer's guidelines. In this case, make sure the water is the correct temperature based on what the manufacturer has said for the type of sanitizer that you use. In addition, you want to make sure you're using the right amount of sanitizer for the amount of water that you're using. Your sanitizer should come with a little test kit to make sure that you can test the effectiveness of the sanitizer that you have. You also want to make sure that you leave the sanitizer sit on surfaces for the correct amount of time based on directions from your manufacturer, and allow the sanitizer to air dry on the surface. Again, please avoid any sort of paper towels or cloth towels to dry surfaces. When it comes to cleaning and sanitizing dishes or smaller types of equipment, the 3-compartment sink is the way to do this. In the first sink, you're going to have water at least 110 degrees, and this should be soapy water, so make sure you add detergent. The second sink is going to be filled with water only, and this sink is for rinsing. If you have a sprayer, you can leave this sink empty and then just spray your dishes. The third sink is for sanitizing, so you'll fill this sink with water and with the sanitizer that you have on hand. Using a 3-compartment sink is pretty similar to cleaning and sanitizing a surface. In the first sink we wash, the second sink we rinse, and the third sink we sanitize. More specifically, the first step for using a 3-compartment sink is to rinse, scrape, and soak the items before washing them. That means do these things before you fill your sink number 1. Then you're going to wash your items in the first sink. You can do this with a brush, cloth, really any sort of cleaning utensil that's going to work good for you. The third step is to rinse the items in the second sink. If you have your sink full of water, you're going to dip the washed items into your clean water. If you left your sink empty, you'll simply spray off your clean dish. The next step is to sanitize the items in the third sink. You want to make sure you're soaking your items for the correct length of time based on your sanitizer manufacturer guidelines. Once you've sanitized, you definitely don't want to rinse this item again. It could contaminate the surface, and then you'll have to start all over with washing the dish. The last step to using a 3-compartment sink is to air dry your items. Again, please don't wipe your items off with any sort of paper or cloth towel because we don't want to introduce any sort of physical contaminant. Let's take a moment to think. What's the first thing you should do when setting up a 3-compartment sink? A. Fill the sinks with water. B. Mix the sanitizing solution. C. Mix the detergent solution. Or D. Clean and sanitize the sinks. The correct answer is D. Of course, we do want to clean and sanitize the sinks before we're going to clean our dishes. On to talking about handling garbage. In this picture, why do you think this garbage was not handled correctly? It's pretty easy to see. For one thing, it's left on the floor, and second, it's allowed to stack up. We want to make sure that we are removing garbage as quickly as possible. If you fill up one bag, make sure that garbage goes directly outside into the garbage dumpster. This picture looks a little bit better. As you can see, the container is being cleaned out. Now, many of you might not think about cleaning garbage containers as an important part of food safety, but if something leaks into that garbage container, it will attract pests. So it is important to make sure that your garbage containers are cleaned regularly. If you're not able to do it yourselves for your specific food program, please be sure to communicate with your building custodian or maintenance person so that this task can be done regularly. What's another way that you can see that garbage is being handled safely in this picture? Here, the lid is closed, which is important for indoor as well as outdoor containers handling garbage. Another very important part of food safety is making sure that we know the signs of pests. Here, all 3 of these pictures are signs of pests. In A, we have droppings. B, somebody looks like they're making a very comfy nest. And in C, there's damage to the product. Looks like somebody was trying to eat through that packaging. It's important that if you do see any of these signs or additional signs of pests, that you contact a qualified professional for your pest control. Please do not try to do your own pest control at your locations. You've made it through the bulk of the training. The last thing we'll review is a few frequently asked questions. Can I hand out individual packages from its original packaging? For example, maybe you have a large cereal box with 2 bags in it, or a box of granola bars that has individually packaged bars. The answer is sometimes. You can hand out individual packaging if it's labeled with the ingredients and expiration date. If the inner package is not labeled, in the case of most cereal boxes that have more than 1 bag inside, you really should serve the entire original package, and you can save that for a larger family. The other option, if the inner package is not labeled, is to create your own label for each individual package with the ingredients and expiration date exactly as it appears on the original package. The important thing to know here is that you may not repack a bulk item into smaller portions. For example, if you have a very large bag of cereal, you may not open that bag of cereal and put it into smaller portions to serve to more families. Another common question we get is, can I accept meat from a hunter who wants to donate? And fortunately, the answer in this case is yes. Please just communicate with the hunter that the meat must be packaged by a USDA inspected facility. Really what this means is you can go to your local butcher or your local grocery store and they should be able to package the meat. What we want to avoid is anybody packaging their own meat independently. The last question is, I received a lot of product and I'm not sure if it's okay to serve. What do I do? An example of this is, let's say you've received a lot of shelf-stable dairy and you're just not sure if it's safe to eat. The first thing you should do is check the date. Our general rule of thumb is if it's within 1 year of the expiration date, it should be safe to eat. But if you don't quite trust it, you can go ahead and open one of the containers and test it for safety. In this case, smell will probably be a big indicator whether or not that product is okay. If you've opened that product, tried it out, and you still aren't quite sure, just remember, when in doubt, throw it out. Or if you wouldn't eat it, you probably shouldn't serve it to somebody else. Thank you for your time to go through our food handler food safety training. Please remember that if you do operate a hot meal, you also need to complete the food preparation training, which is in the same section of our website. And lastly, don't forget to take the quiz. You do need to take the quiz for the food handler training, found in the YouTube notes below, and once we receive your quiz and we have a chance to review it, we'll send you your certificate of completion. As always, please don't hesitate to reach out if you had any questions about this training or any of our other trainings. Thanks!